Trucks have long been more than just vehicles in America. They're symbols of freedom, resilience, and utility, tools of the working class, the rural families, the small business owners, and the everyday Americans who rely on them not only for transportation, but for their livelihoods. For decades, the truck market thrived, growing into a $200 billion a year juggernaut. But now, something unthinkable is happening. The heart of American mobility is collapsing, quietly, swiftly, and largely unnoticed. Unlike the 2008 financial crisis or the COVID-induced supply chain meltdowns, this current crisis is happening under the radar. The U.S. economy, at least on the surface, appears stable. Employment numbers remain high, consumer confidence is relatively resilient, and stock markets continue to hover near historic highs. But in the truck industry, dealerships are closing their doors for good. Manufacturing plants are scaling back production by as much as 25%. And perhaps most alarmingly, families are losing their trucks, vehicles they once worked hard to own, to repossession at rates not seen in over a decade. Real quick, if you're into videos that cut through the noise and break things down clearly, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find this. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. We've got more deep dives coming your way. Also, drop a comment and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your take. Now onto the video. The collapse is deeply unsettling because of how silent it has been. There's no major stock market crash attached to it, no massive layoff announcements from automakers dominating headlines. Instead, the symptoms are showing up in local communities, in empty dealership lots, in the homes of working families stretched to the financial breaking point, and in quiet conversations among auto dealers who are barely hanging on. This isn't just a case of sluggish sales or poor inventory management. The crisis goes deeper. It's rooted in a fundamental breakdown between what trucks cost and what Americans can afford. Over the past few years, truck prices have skyrocketed. The average full-size pickup truck now carries a price tag north of $64,000, an amount nearly equivalent to the median annual household income in the United States. Factor in taxes, dealer fees, insurance, and especially financing, and the monthly cost of truck ownership has exploded to levels once thought impossible. And this time, the pain is spreading in silence. Unlike past collapses that prompted immediate governmental response or sparked massive public outcry, this one is happening slowly, invisibly. Many Americans don't even realize the storm is building until it hits them personally, until they walk into a dealership and realize they can't afford the same truck their parents bought for half the price, until they receive a repossession notice in the mail, until they're denied financing altogether. The underlying issue isn't just the price of the truck. It's the shifting landscape of American affordability. Incomes haven't kept up with inflation, interest rates have surged, and yet manufacturers have continued pushing more luxurious, more expensive trucks onto the market, ignoring the growing disconnect between consumer purchasing power and vehicle pricing. Industry analysts were late to sound the alarm. Many continued to predict a cooling off period or a minor correction, dismissing early warning signs as temporary fluctuations. But dealers on the ground saw the truth. Vehicles that once sold within days now sit idle for months. Inventory has become a liability instead of an asset. And as floor plan costs mount, many dealers face a brutal reality. The trucks they were once proud to showcase are now financial time bombs. The ripple effects are only beginning. When dealerships shut down, local economies suffer. Jobs are lost, not just for sales staff, but for mechanics, administrative teams, parts distributors, and local service providers who rely on the dealership ecosystem. And when families lose access to affordable transportation, the consequences spill over into everything from employment opportunities to daily errands. This is not merely a supply chain issue. It's not a hiccup in production or a fleeting market trend. It's a systematic breakdown of a once thriving sector. It's the unraveling of an entire economic model that has supported millions of American families for decades. And yet, The true scale of the disaster remains largely invisible to the average consumer until they try to buy, until they face the monthly payment quote, until they realize that the truck they've been saving for is now out of reach. But what caused this slow motion collapse? What changed between the booming sales of just a few years ago and the current crisis choking the industry? The answer lies in something far more precise and far more terrifying. Because when the math stopped working, the dream began to die. The numbers don't lie. And they tell a story more devastating than any market analyst predicted. Across the country, Americans are walking into dealerships with hope and walking out in disbelief. Not because they've been turned down for credit, but because the price tags on the trucks they once dreamed of have become mathematically impossible. Mike Patterson, a seasoned sales manager at a major Ford dealership in Oregon, described the situation bluntly. They want to buy the truck. They love it. They're excited. But once we do the math, they realize they just can't. The payments exceed their mortgage. And he's not exaggerating. Take the Ford Bronco Raptor as an example. Just 5 years ago, a top-tier truck like that would have been expensive, but within reason for dual-income households. Today, it sits on dealership lots with a $93,000 price tag, untouched. Even affluent buyers, flush with cash, are beginning to balk. Why? Because even they know it's absurd. And it's not just Ford. A GMC Sierra AT4X is approaching $90,000. This is a vehicle that shares a platform with a $30,000 work truck from just a few years back. The disconnect has become undeniable, and consumers are responding by walking away. David Martinez, a construction foreman in Seattle, has been trying to replace his aging work truck for 6 months. Everything under $60,000 is either stripped bare or sold instantly, he explains. I'll just keep driving my old one until the wheels fall off. I'm not taking a payment that's bigger than my house. It's a sentiment being echoed across America. The reality is harsh. The median household income in the United States is around $70,000. But the average price of a full-size pickup truck, over $64,000. Once taxes, registration, insurance, and financing are factored in, families face monthly payments of $1,000 or more, often consuming 30% to 40% of their gross income. That's not just unsustainable. It's financial suicide. The traditional rule of thumb is that no more than 15% of gross monthly income should go toward vehicle expenses. But today's truck payments blow past that benchmark with brutal force. A $900 truck note plus $300 in insurance and fuel pushes the total monthly transportation cost to $1,100. For a $70,000 household, that's more than 20% of the entire household income, before accounting for rent, food, childcare, or debt obligations. This is what economists call a cost-to-utility inversion. The product, trucks, has become so expensive that the value it offers no longer justifies the price. In the past, consumers could stretch for a new truck knowing it would be worth the investment in durability, utility, and resale value. Now, that calculation is broken. Worse still, trade-in values are no longer the relief valve they once were. Negative equity has become the norm. Customers still owe $8,000 or more on trucks they're trying to offload, vehicles that have depreciated faster than they can pay them down. That means they're trapped, unable to afford the new truck and unable to sell the old one. And behind it all looms the financing monster. Interest rates have surged from historic lows of 3-5% to 8%, 10%, even 15% for buyers with average credit. For working class Americans, especially those with imperfect credit, rates of 18 to 20% are not uncommon. That turns a $45,000 truck into a $60,000 plus long-term debt burden once interest is included. The math is no longer just discouraging, it's devastating. So while the trucks remain parked in rows, polished and gleaming under showroom lights, the reality for average Americans has turned into a financial horror story. The numbers simply don't add up anymore. And when the math breaks, so does the market. But while customers were doing the math and walking away, something else was happening behind the scenes. Inside dealership offices, the crisis was morphing into something even darker, something that would soon shatter the industry from within. If you think the customer side of the truck crisis is bad, the inside of a dealership right now is a pressure cooker of desperation, fear, and financial survival. Beneath the clean lighting and cheerful sales pitches, dealerships are hemorrhaging money in silence. Behind the glass offices and fancy banners, floor plan financing, a common dealership practice, is now a ticking time bomb. Floor plan financing is how dealers buy inventory. They take out short-term loans to stock trucks on their lots. For every $1,000 in vehicle value, they typically pay about 27 cents in interest per day. That might not sound like much until you scale it. A $60,000 truck costs a dealer more than $16,800 per day just to sit there. If that vehicle goes unsold for 200 days, a timeline that's become common, it racks up over $3,200 in interest charges alone without factoring in depreciation, insurance, or lost opportunity cost. Multiply that by 100 unsold trucks, and dealerships are staring down the barrel of $300,000 in silent losses just for waiting. Desperation has set in, and it's forcing some dealers to cross ethical lines that they would have never even considered a few years ago. At one Toyota dealership, a manager revealed an internal practice that's quickly becoming standard across the country. Brand new trucks are being titled under dealership employees or their relatives, driven for just 2 miles to reset the odometer, and then relisted as used vehicles. Why? Because doing so allows them to sidestep manufacturer pricing restrictions, rebate constraints, and critically floor plan interest calculations. A 2024 Tacoma listed for $43,000 new was relabeled used and sold for $45,000. Same vehicle. Just a different title. These aren't isolated incidents. This tactic, once seen as blatant manipulation, is now normalized. Because to these dealerships, it's survival. Inventory manipulation, fake titles, and odometer tricks are no longer the exceptions. They're the business model. What's worse, the customers don't know. And many wouldn't even understand what's happening if they did. This is the dark side of dealership economics in crisis mode. When trucks don't sell, dealers don't just lose profit. They spiral into debt. The flooring interest builds daily. The bank wants its payments. Manufacturer bonuses vanish. Salespeople lose commissions. And the service department, dead silent. The result is a dealer network that looks fine from the outside, but is rotting from within. And this toxic environment is starting to collapse in on itself. Because eventually, the tricks stop working. The customers catch on. The cash flow dries up. And what comes next is total implosion. But this didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a flash crash. It was a slow motion avalanche, a collapse that unfolded piece by piece, ignored by the very people who should have seen it coming. Every market collapse has its warning signs. The truck industries were everywhere. But for months, maybe even years, those signs were ignored, dismissed by analysts, downplayed by manufacturers, and rationalized by dealers. What looked like a soft plateau quickly snowballed into the largest consumer vehicle crisis in a generation. It started with the premium truck models, the crown jewels of American manufacturing. The Ford Bronco Raptor, the Ram TRX, the high-end Sierras and Tundras. These trucks used to fly off lots in 72 hours or less. Now, they sit for 6 to 8 months collecting dust, depreciation, and carrying costs. Dealers blamed seasonality, supply chain delays, market fatigue. But the truth was simpler. The market had peaked and they didn't want to believe it. At the same time, a secondary force was building, one even more lethal than price fatigue: interest rates. Just a few years ago, a buyer with decent credit could finance a truck at 3%. Today, that same buyer is looking at 8 to 12%, sometimes more. For a $60,000 truck, that's the difference between a $900 monthly payment and a $300 financial anchor. And this hit at the worst possible time. American families were already dealing with inflation in food, rent, and healthcare. Add a bloated truck payment to that mix, and something had to give, and it did. Repossession rates soared by 28% year over year, with trucks accounting for the majority of seized vehicles. Families who had stretched to afford the truck of their dreams found themselves living a nightmare. Missed payments turned into defaulted loans. Lenders repossessed trucks by the thousands. Auction lots overflowed with used inventory, while new models remained unsold. Then came the third wave, consumer psychology. Historically, Americans traded in vehicles every 3 to 4 years. But now, that cycle is dead. Trade-ins have plummeted. Vehicle aging has surged. Trucks 8 to 10 years old are the new normal. And that's not by choice, it's by necessity. People can't afford to upgrade and they can't afford to trade down. The shift is permanent. The industry runs on turnover, not stagnation. And when consumers stop trading, stop buying, and stop believing, it all begins to fall apart. And yet, while all this was happening, while the signs were flashing red, something even worse was being prepared behind the scenes. Something that would not only make prices spike, but would trigger the final domino. Because when tariffs entered the picture, the collapse became complete. If the pricing crisis was the match, then the tariffs were the gasoline. Just as the American truck market was beginning to buckle under the weight of its own excesses, soaring vehicle prices, spiraling interest rates, and collapsing buyer confidence, a new threat appeared, and this one came directly from Washington. In an effort to strengthen domestic manufacturing and reduce reliance on foreign parts, the federal government introduced a 25% tariff on imported vehicles and components. On paper, the goal was patriotic: incentivize American production, punish offshore profiteering, and protect American jobs. But in practice, it lit the fuse that blew up what remained of truck affordability. The impact was instant and brutal. Auto manufacturers responded not with adjustments or patience, but with preemptive price hikes. Anticipating the costs of tariffs, many raised prices overnight. Trucks that were already unaffordable saw another $3,000 to $5,000 tacked on without warning. This wasn't speculation, it was self-preservation. Companies feared shrinking margins and raced to protect profits before policy took effect. And the result? Consumer confidence collapsed completely. Already on edge from high interest rates and unstable pricing, buyers interpreted the sudden hikes as a signal to stop shopping altogether. Dealership foot traffic dropped sharply. Web traffic to truck inventory listings dipped double digits. And in the communities where truck sales had been the economic heartbeat, particularly in rural America, the decline was felt instantly. For the dealerships, it was a death sentence. Jim Patterson, owner of a small family-run dealership in rural Oregon, put it plainly, "We were already hanging on by a thread, but when Ford raised MSRP by $3,400 overnight, we knew it was over." His lot, which once sold 20 trucks a month, sold 3 in the past 60 days. But this crisis wasn't just about sticker shock. It was about the psychology of fear. Consumers don't like uncertainty. And when they see prices behaving erratically, rising for no clear reason, they tend to wait. They hesitate. They delay decisions. And that, in a sales-driven industry, is devastating. Manufacturers tried to spin the news. Press releases emphasized strategic realignments and adjusted pricing models. But dealers weren't fooled. The real message was clear. Trucks are about to become even more expensive and less attainable for the average American. And the ripple effect didn't stop at the showroom door. Tariffs didn't just affect finished trucks. They hit components too. Everything from engines and transmissions to chips, steel parts, and wiring harnesses. That meant repair costs exploded. Owners who were already hanging on to aging vehicles found themselves facing $3,000 repair bills for what used to cost $200. This led to a second financial death spiral: the repair or replace dilemma. Consumers who couldn't afford a new truck also couldn't afford to fix the old one. So they delayed repairs, they deferred maintenance, and eventually many ended up without reliable transportation at all. Meanwhile, small businesses dependent on trucks, plumbers, electricians, delivery contractors, were forced to either pass those costs on to customers or absorb losses. Some simply closed shop altogether. Local economies began to reel. In towns built around truck plants, dealership clusters, or logistics hubs, layoffs accelerated. Restaurants, convenience stores, auto parts retailers, everyone began to feel the strain. And yet, because national employment numbers stayed flat, this collapse remained invisible at the macro level. That's what made this tariff-driven fallout so dangerous. It didn't trigger a national economic crash. It triggered 1,000 micro-recessions, each too small to dominate headlines, but devastating to the people living through them. The truck market, once a symbol of American strength and independence, was unraveling in slow motion. And the consequences weren't limited to balance sheets or quarterly earnings, because behind the numbers were real people, and their lives were about to be upended. Behind every repossession statistic, every dealership closure, and every price increase, there's a person, a family, a dream deferred. For many Americans, owning a truck isn't just about transportation. It's about identity, capability, and stability. But as the collapse intensified, so did the personal toll. Financial ruin was no longer a cautionary tale. It was a daily reality. Take Maria Rodriguez, a single mother and former construction project manager from Portland. In 2022, she purchased a Ford F-150, confident in her stable $75,000 a year income. Her payment? A steep but manageable $897 per month. Then came layoffs. Her income dropped to $52,000. The payment didn't. After 6 months of struggling, juggling bills, and cutting corners on food and utilities, Maria made a heartbreaking decision. She voluntarily surrendered the vehicle. The auction it went to didn't even come close to covering her loan. Now, she owes $14,000 on a truck she doesn't own, and her credit is destroyed. I can't get another vehicle, not even a lease, she said. I can't even rent an apartment because my credit score tanked. I did everything right, and I still lost everything. Her story isn't unique. Across the country, vehicle repossessions skyrocketed, not just among subprime borrowers, but among middle-class families with previously excellent credit. Why? Because truck payments had ballooned beyond rational thresholds. A $70,000 truck financed at 10% means $1,200 per month, plus insurance, fuel, maintenance. That's more than the average mortgage in most states, and the moment income dropped even slightly, the margin vanished. Credit devastation followed. Defaults on auto loans are among the most damaging events to a consumer's credit report. And unlike mortgage defaults, there's no government forbearance program, no safety net, just collection agencies, ballooning interest, and locked-out opportunities. Families who once had credit scores in the 700s suddenly found themselves in the 500s. They couldn't buy another vehicle, couldn't qualify for a mortgage refinance, couldn't even rent a decent home in many cities. And it wasn't just the borrowers who suffered. The collapse took down employees, too. Linda Martinez spent 14 years working at a dealership in Spokane, Washington. She started as a receptionist and worked her way up to finance manager. She knew her customers, helped them structure payments, guided them through warranty plans. She was part of the community. But when her dealership closed after 6 straight months of floor plan losses, Linda found herself unemployed at 48, with skills specialized for an industry that was no longer hiring. This was my life. I don't know anything else. And no one's hiring. Everyone's laying off. Thousands like Linda found themselves on the wrong side of an industry in freefall. Technicians with years of experience in diesel systems and computerized diagnostics found their expertise suddenly obsolete as dealerships shuttered or downsized. Parts managers who had relationships with contractors and fleet operators saw their jobs eliminated overnight. Entire service departments went dark. And in every one of these stories, the ripple effects grew. Children pulled out of school to move in with relatives, homes sold under duress, savings accounts drained to keep up with payments, all for the dream of owning a truck, a dream that had once felt so simple, so attainable. But when that dream collapsed, it didn't just damage wallets, it shattered lives. The collapse didn't stop at consumers. It swallowed the very foundation of the truck industry, dealerships. For generations, these family-run businesses formed the backbone of rural and suburban America. Small, locally owned, multi-generational dealerships that did more than sell vehicles. They built relationships, sponsored little league teams, supported church fundraisers, and offered jobs to entire communities. Now they're disappearing. From North Dakota to Texas, independent dealerships are closing at a pace not seen since the 2008 financial crisis. And this time, the recovery isn't expected to come. Jim Patterson, owner of Patterson Motors in rural Oregon, knew the end was near when he calculated his monthly flooring costs, $18,000. We've got 47 trucks on the lot. At an average daily cost of $12 per truck, we're bleeding over $500 per day just to keep them parked. That $15,000, $20,000 monthly bill came before payroll, utilities, insurance, or taxes. And the trucks weren't moving. Traditional dealer margins, usually 3-5% per vehicle, weren't enough to offset the losses. With trucks sitting unsold for 120 to 200 days, the math of survival simply didn't work anymore. And the closures came fast. Within a span of 6 months, dozens of small dealerships across the Midwest and South announced closures. Many had been in operation for decades. Some were even passed down through 3 or 4 generations. For their owners, walking away wasn't just a business decision, it was the end of a legacy. Employees were devastated. One dealership in Kentucky laid off 27 workers in a single day, including service techs, finance managers, and office administrators. For towns where those jobs represented one of the few stable employment options, the closures hit like a sledgehammer, and as the independents fell, the consolidation began. Larger, capital-heavy dealer groups began scooping up smaller lots, or simply absorbing market share as local competitors vanished. But even they weren't immune. Many were forced to cut costs, lay off staff, and halt expansion plans as the flooring losses piled up. The extinction of the local dealership isn't just a retail trend, it's a cultural loss. These businesses weren't just places to buy trucks, they were cornerstones of small-town identity. And their collapse marks a turning point in how Americans interact with the auto industry. No more face-to-face trust. No more knowing your dealer by name. No more handshakes at the service desk. What's left is cold, digital, corporate, and for many Americans, deeply unfamiliar. The truck industry's middle layer, dealerships, has been hollowed out. And in its absence, the rest of the system is starting to crumble too. In every economic crisis, there's usually a backdoor, an escape route that allows struggling businesses to offload risk. For dealerships, that escape route was always the auction house. When trucks sat too long, when demand dipped, or when trade-ins piled up, auctions were the safety valve. Dealers could liquidate vehicles quickly, even at a small loss, and keep their floor plan debts in check. But this time, the valve failed. As repossession skyrocketed and dealership closures accelerated, auction houses were flooded with used trucks. Thousands of vehicles, many barely a year or two old, poured into wholesale channels, creating a glut that overwhelmed even the most seasoned auction operators. Prices plummeted. A 2022 Ford F-150 Platinum, which would have fetched $55,000 just 8 months prior, sold for $38,000 at auction. A Ram 1500 Limited that once commanded $60,000. Wholesale dropped below $40,000. Even work trucks, previously considered safe inventory, saw double-digit percentage declines. For dealerships already drowning in debt, this was a death blow. Vehicles they planned to sell for profit were now worth less than their floor plan loan amounts. Some dealers tried to wait it out. Others sold at massive losses to salvage liquidity. But for many, there was no good option left. What made this different from past downturns was the speed and the scale. In just 6 months, wholesale truck values declined by 18% across all models, according to data from Manheim Auctions. That's not a market correction. That's a collapse, and the cycle fed itself. With wholesale prices crashing, dealerships couldn't accept trade-ins because they couldn't resell them profitably. And if customers couldn't trade in their current vehicles, they couldn't afford new ones. The result? Fewer transactions, lower dealer revenue, and even more unsold inventory. The collapse of the auction market also exposed one of the industry's biggest blind spots. reliance on inflated values. For years, artificially high resale values had created a false sense of security for both dealers and consumers. Customers took on bigger loans assuming their trucks would retain value. Dealers stocked inventory with the expectation of high turnover. Everyone was riding the wave until the bottom dropped out. Now, banks are nervous. Lenders are adjusting residual value assumptions downward, loan-to-value ratios are being tightened, and dealers are being forced to post more collateral or take smaller inventory orders. Even more troubling, manufacturers have pulled back on buyback programs. These programs, which once allowed dealers to return unsold or off-lease vehicles at a guaranteed price, are no longer viable in a free-falling market. That means dealers are stuck, shouldering the full brunt of depreciation and resale volatility. And as the auction glut continued to grow, a new threat emerged: corporate fleet liquidations. Major corporations, facing rising costs and uncertain demand, began offloading fleet vehicles en masse. Amazon, UPS, and dozens of construction firms flooded the market with trucks, SUVs, and vans, all competing with retail dealers for buyer attention. The result? Even steeper price drops. Auction operators themselves are struggling to keep up. Facilities are overcrowded. Transport logistics are strained, and wholesale buyers, many of them independent used car dealers, are running out of capital. It's a perfect storm. Too much supply, not enough demand, and no liquidity. What was once the final pressure release has become the collapse's next casualty. And without the auction house as a viable option, the entire ecosystem of truck sales is left with nowhere to turn. But even amid this financial carnage, something unexpected began to happen. Out of desperation, the market began to reset. The American truck market didn't just face a collapse, it endured a reckoning. What was once a booming, aspirational industry, fueled by affordable financing and the dream of freedom on four wheels, crashed under the weight of its own excess. Sky-high prices, punishing interest rates, repo surges, and desperate dealer tactics all came together to expose the fragile foundation beneath the chrome and horsepower. But from that wreckage, something new is emerging. A market that's leaner, more disciplined, and more aligned with the real-world needs of everyday Americans. Trucks are still here, but they're no longer status symbols for the middle class. They're practical tools again, purchased by those who can truly afford them, not by those forced into debt to keep up appearances. For millions of families, the scars of this collapse will linger on credit reports, in bank accounts, and in broken trust. But for others, this crisis was a wake-up call, a chance to reset not just the market, but their own financial decisions. So the question now is simple. Was this the end of the American truck dream? Or was it a necessary reboot, one that finally brought the industry back down to earth? Once again, thanks for watching this video. If you got something out of this, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. And hey, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Agree, disagree, or something in between. I'd love to hear it.